If you want your questions answered on the podcast, and you want me to answer your theories and your ideas, you need to email Freddy.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host of the Toast, Rye Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, like we always do. And I've been talking a lot about my thoughts on Secret of the Mimic and the theories surrounding it, and I figured it was high time to take some time and focus on your questions. Because all these episodes I've been doing, I've only had room for like one or two questions, and I've been getting a lot of them. So I just have a huge list of questions to go through. We're going to go until we hit like 45, 50 minutes, and we're going to call it. So that sounds like a plan. That sounds like a plan. And I have excellent news, and I keep Charlie Browning. If for anyone who doesn't know, to Charlie Brown is when things are going well, you're expecting something to go wrong. So I keep Charlie Browning about this, and I don't want to jinx anything, but like the lease has been signed for a month now. This may very well be the last podcast I have to record in a basement. We're moving. We've been moving for like a week. It's why the shorts kind of stopped happening and why I missed last week's Etc. podcast and why this week's Heroes and Misfortunes, which is the D&D podcast on the third channel, is also going to be missing. Because I have not had time to do a lot of the like editing for the stuff that doesn't necessarily make money. You know, I only have very limited time with the move, so I had to focus on the things that actually like fund the move and all that. But luckily, once we're moved, I should have more time than ever. So fingers crossed that after the move, not only will that come back up, but maybe some other things like some covers, some comic dubs, some of the more like artsy, creative stuff that I've really wanted to do, but I haven't had time for. Hopefully I'll have time for that now because I should have my own space come next week. So we'll see. Technically, I could be recording in there now, but there's no internet, so there's no point to move my computer over because I couldn't upload anything. Because, little peek behind the curtain, I usually like having these podcasts uploaded at 11 a.m. on Tuesdays. I'm recording this at 1 p.m. on Tuesday, so there's a reason why this might be going up on Wednesday or at like today at 3 p.m. We'll see. But that's your peek behind the curtain. That's the keeping up with the toasts portion of the podcast that we always do here. But if you have questions you want answered on the podcast, send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That link is in the description to copy and paste because it is a pain to type out. I'll tell you what, one of the things I cannot wait about this new office is that I'm going to have central air in it. You'll probably see as this podcast goes on, there's no air conditioning in this, and we're in a heat advisory in this basement. Luckily, it's the basement, so it's a little cooler than the rest of the house. But my back is currently dripping with sweat, so hopefully I'm not too visibly sweaty by the end of this damn podcast. And you might be saying, Rye, if you're like overheating, why are you drinking hot tea? I don't like iced tea. Simple as. It's a blueberry lemon tea, by the way. It's very good. Our first question comes from the Blonde Squirrel, they, them. Firstly, the audio log the player can find where Murray is tweaking the frequency for the first mimic, that being Fiona. I was immediately reminded of the Dreadbear minigame from the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. Please correct me if I'm wrong or where this minigame is from. You're right. Where you have to fix Dreadbear, and one of the things you have to do is find the right frequency. I have a feeling that somehow these two are connected, and I was thinking even more so in your explanation at the endings of Secret of the Mimic about Fiona's spirit taking over and possessing the endoskeleton. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. No, you're good. Secondly, the fact that both William and Henry were working with Murray on the characters is huge for the lore, and even more so, that there seems to be wrongdoing on Fazbear's end with the contract, and we actively see William's logs in the game as well. This then brings me to this. I wonder if William somehow learned what the Mimic truly was and wanted it for himself, to do it to himself, therefore starting his whole obsession with immortality and leading into the experiments and whatnot. Thus, the rest of the games and timelines playing out after William goes bonkers. There's a lot I want to talk about here. First of all, your connection with the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, where you have to find the right frequency for Dreadbear's brain. I think that is very worthwhile to bring up, since we, like you said, we have that log in the basement where Edwin is like, set frequency to 4625. Hello, is anybody there? And he's trying to reach out to Fiona's spirit. Because I mean, by the time of Help Wanted, the Mimic was planned, right? Like, we know that at least of the time of Help Wanted being made, Scott had the Mimic in the back of his mind. And that's just like, that's pretty self-explanatory with the connections we have from Help Wanted and the current games, not to mention that when the books were being developed as well is around that time. So you're very right to bring that up. And I am curious what that could mean for the grander context of things. And then as far as, William poaching employees, there's also that log that we get in the office where Edwin's like, I figured it out, there's a leak. They know about M2, but they can't have it. So William and Henry know about M2 at some point before they get their hands on it. The idea that William wants to make himself into a mimic, I do like that as a inciting incident. Because we've been saying for years, no one really knows why William goes crazy. No one knows why he starts doing this. Some people say that when the crying child goes into the coma, he starts looking into immortality, and then he loses himself in there. Some people say he's always been completely batshit crazy. But we've never had, like, the inciting incident for why William is the way he is. The idea that William got his hands on all this tech and all these I'm just going to let my bangs hang. I'm tired of fixing them. The idea that William got his hands on all this tech and the recordings and seeing M1 being Fiona, and he went, oh, I could make myself into this. I like that a lot. It's very Portal 2, this idea of immortality. Like, maybe my body and mind die, but if I can recreate my mind in this endoskeleton, I can live forever. I can live forever as this robot. I like that a lot, actually. And then that would kind of make sense for an inciting incident for William, because, like, up until this point, this is 1979 when this game is taking place. So the idea that William Afton was always this seedy businessman who's just in it for himself, and then suddenly he learns that there is a robot that can basically recreate a human. I love that idea. Especially if we pair it with how Murray Costume Manor kind of falls, because under Edwin Murray Sr., it seems like the company was incredibly successful, and then when Edwin Murray, the guy we know, takes over, it starts going in the dumps. William Afton could see that as a reflection of his own businesses. The idea that, like, William Afton has spent these years developing this insane, like, Fazbear enterprise, and if he ever gave it to his children, it could all fall apart, and his legacy was for nothing. I love the idea that William Afton would want to create this mimic to make him, recreate himself, not necessarily just to be immortal, but also so that William Afton can always run Fazbear Entertainment, so it can always be profitable. Like, if Edwin Sr. had a mimic, Edwin Sr. could still be running Murray's Costume Manor, and it would still be a successful business. But because Edwin Jr. took over, it failed. I think that's a really funny motivation. Now, again, that's kind of my evidence-less interpretation on top of it, but the idea that William seeing the footage and maybe even getting a hold of the M1 or, like, just the mimic endoskeleton and seeing the footage of it recreating Fiona, and that being his inciting incident, kind of does line up with what the experiments we see are. Especially if he believes, like Edwin believed, that Fiona's spirit is the reason why M1 worked. That would explain why he keeps killing kids and stuffing them into animatronic suits to try to see if, like, okay, if somebody dies near this animatronic, can I induce that possession? Will that then work? And I kind of really love that, actually. So, again, I don't know if you're right, but you're right to point it out. And I think it's a really interesting motivation for William Afton in, frankly, a void of motivations. We really have no idea why William Afton begins to do the things he does. Like, around the time of the missing child incident, after that, we can kind of follow why William is doing the things he's doing. But, like, why does he do it in the first place is something we have never known. And the idea of, well, if I can make a mimic, I could be immortal. And, like, this is where he first sees it. I like that a lot. So thank you for your question. Or I guess just your theory at that point. Our next question comes from Michael, he, him. More of a statement than a question. Kind of with the same with the last one. I noticed that in your playthrough of Secret of the Mimic, you thought that Monty was originally in the band because of the storybook ending. But there is also a dog and bear button on the podium. I think this means that all 6, Foxy, Chica, Bonnie, Freddy, Bub, and Monty, were all part of the original Freddy's concept from Fiona, because of them all being present in the pizzeria, along with possibly Fredbear and Spring Bonnie from Henry and Williams' additions to the idea. Thank you for your thank you for your statement / question. I'm gonna bring this up now, because I saw it the other day and I really liked that interpretation. So let me open Twitter real quick. Who posted this? Okay, so it was posted on Reddit, and I saw it shared on Twitter. So I'll go to the Reddit post by Barons SFM on Reddit. Put it up on screen, Riley. But they posted this infographic, the idea of Fiona's designs versus Fazbear's designs. And honestly, it's pretty well argued here. Like, I'm looking at it and I don't see any immediate issues with it. The idea that, like, we hear that Fiona's designs were close to final, they were basically finished, and like Edwin's like, I think they're cuter, I like them more, I'm not changing them. And we have the alt Fazbear designs on the computer in the manor. So the idea that these springlock suits were the ones that were Fiona's designs, especially since we had the other audio log that, like, why can't we just have the teens wear a suit like we always do? Henry is rejecting the springlock suits. This is again pointed out in this post, like, Henry is rejecting these springlock suits, and the Fazbear designs, the new ones, the ones we know, those aren't springlocks. That's the big change. It's like, we're not doing springlock suits anymore. Also do these designs instead. So I actually really like this idea that Fiona's designs were these prototype springlock suits that were never used, because again, these are the prototype ones. This is not the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie that we go on to see the Bite of 83 in Fredbear's Family Diner. Not the same suit. However, I do really like the idea, and I think this is a pretty solid explanation that these suits were the original ones Fiona designed. It was always going to be 4 people at the pizzeria, and then they, at the last minute, rejected it and said, no, you're doing these animatronics instead that will not be springlock suits. And that's where you get Foxy, and that's where you get Chica. And I like that a lot. So going back to your question in particular, were all of them meant to be the original Freddy's concept? I think possibly. I think what this is showing us is that the original group of characters that they were kind of putting together were these 6. This bear, rabbit, chicken, fox, alligator, dog. These 2 extra characters, right? And then instead of that, the alternative Fazbear designs is just these 4 animatronics. Now, the interesting thing is that if that's true, you would think the original Fiona designs would be 6 springlock suits instead of 4, which is seemingly replacing Bub and Monty with Bonnie and with Foxy and Chica. But then we look throughout the game, and it seems like Chica and Foxy existed before Fazbear, right? It seems like Fredbear and Bonnie were always the first main 2 characters, and Chica and Foxy were more so acquired. Obviously, we know for, like, fact that Chica was from Chica's Party World and had her own restaurant, her own roller rink, and eventually that company hit an economic strait, and Fazbear seemed to have gobbled them up. And then we look at Foxy. And in this game, we get, like, the Puppet Foxy show, where he's got his own crew with Roxy, with Captain Springlock, and all these characters. It almost seems like Foxy was an Edwin Murray original, especially since the Roxy hand puppet was made by Fiona for David's first birthday. So again, like, it seems like this Foxy character was actually an Edwin Murray original. And if that's true, then it seems like the Fazbear original gang may have been Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, Bub the dog, and Monty the alligator. And then when they went to create Freddy Fazbear's, they swapped out those 2 with their newly acquired brand new shiny characters, Chica and Foxy. Which is interesting, to say the least, if that's what the explanation were, because we always knew Chica seemed to be from a different company first. But Foxy's interesting because we never really knew, like, Foxy, as far as we know, was always a Fazbear original, but at the same time, Foxy was always separated from the main 3. It was always Bonnie, Freddy, Chica, and also Foxy. So Foxy, while we didn't have any inkling that Foxy was from another company, we always knew that Foxy was separate from the rest of the gang. Which, if this is true, and if Foxy is an Edwin original, then in that case, I kind of see why. I kind of see why his theming and his area is always separate from the other 3 animatronics. The idea that Foxy was added on after the fact, which, if that's true, then you have to ask, like, okay, then what about Chica? Because Chica is pretty much part of the main gang, but was from a rival company, wasn't she? Yeah, I don't have a great explanation for that. And I think the logic might be that I don't think Foxy and Chica, like, let's think about FNAF 1, right? Let's do it this way. As far as FNAF 1 through 4 goes, I don't think Chica and Foxy being other characters that were acquired in the Fazbear brand, I don't think that was in Scott's mind. I think this is thoughts that started popping up later down the line. Especially for Chica, which we kind of see that shift already, where by the time we start hearing about Chica's party world, ever since that moving forward, Chica is kind of separated from the rest of the group, right? Because the first time we hear about Chica's party world, I believe, is Sister Location. And, in Sister Location, Chica is like this ethereal thing that gets mentioned, but we never see her. In FNAF 6, there's a Rockstar Chica, but there's a Rockstar Foxy as well. But Chica isn't in the main cast of animatronics attacking you. It's Molten Freddy, it's Scrap Baby, it's all this. In Ultimate Custom Night, we get that I was the first, I've seen everything. In, I guess that would be Help Wanted. Then in, I know she's in FNAF World, but I don't have any memory of that off the top of my head. In Security Breach, we have Glamrock Chica, so now it's a new character, right? Ever since the idea of Chica being a, earlier character who was adopted in, she was then separated from the group. So, I think that's probably the explanation, is that Scott hadn't thought about it yet. And then looking back, does that mean Scott always planned for Foxy to be a separate character that was added on? I don't think so. But I think in looking at setting up this story and actually nailing down the details of the beginning of this timeline, I think seeing a character that was always so separate from the group, that was always had its own area, had its own, it always functioned differently, it always stood out, that made a lot of sense for that character to be an Edwin original. Likewise, I think the puppet was an Edwin original as well, because I think the whole reason why Jackie is so similar to the puppet, I don't think Jackie became the puppet, but I think Jackie was an Edwin original, and William and Henry approached him and said, we want something like that in our place, and that's the alt puppet design. I think that's what that's meant to be. I think the alt puppet design is Jackie, but looking more like the marionette, and then they had to make it themselves, because before he could get to it, Edwin died, right? So then wrapping around back to your question, the idea of was the original band these 6 characters? I don't think so. I think the original band may have been, and this is pre-1979. So this is very early Fredbear Family Diner. This is before any Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. I think it may have been Spring Bonnie, Fredbear, Bub, and Monty. And then as they are working on the secret Fazbear contract, which is this fake pizzeria that would have been another showroom, but would have also been the prototype for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, in this version of the restaurant, I think they went, hey, Bub and Monty, not as popular of our characters. We just acquired Chica. She's a popular character. Let's grab her on. And we're working with Murray's Costume Manor. So as part of this partnership, let's acquire Pirate Foxy, and he'll be part of this band as well. So now the new band, and this is what happens later in the contract, is that the new band is Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy. And I think that's kind of where this is going. And that would mean that Freddy and Bonnie were always William and Henry originals, Chica was acquired, and Foxy was acquired. I think that's the answer here. I don't think it's that William and Henry didn't create anything. I don't think it's that Henry designed the original, because that's the thing, they sent over the designs. Edwin's just the middleman. Edwin is the one who was supposed to make them real, not the one who designed them. They're not Edwin's designs. They're not Fiona's designs. They are alternate Fazbear designs that they sent over themselves. Because even Edwin's these designs are ugly. I don't like these. So these were designed by Henry and William, probably just Henry, and it was, well, we just acquired Chica, we just acquired Foxy, let's make robotic versions of them to match Freddy and Bonnie, and it'll be this new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Frankly, I wouldn't doubt if the original Freddy and Friends cartoon had Bub and Monty in it at some point, and then we look at, and that's probably why, a part of the reason why Edwin was such a pushback on these designs. The idea of, like, imagine if Pirate Foxy is not only an Edwin original, but a Fiona original, right? She made the Roxy hand puppet that scares David. She likely designed all of this crew. And now his late wife's, like, primary character, the showrunner, Foxy, the one that, like, everybody loved. He got his own, like, full half-body puppet. Fiona designed him. Fazbear's like, okay, we want him, but we're going to change his design. No wonder Edwin got so pissy about that. So I think that's where I'm settling on this, is that the original Fredbear band was Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, Bub, and Monty. And Bub and Monty were not as popular as the other two. So when they made Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, to better differentiate it, they used their two newly acquired characters, Chica and Foxy, to round out the roster. That's my thinking. For now. My thoughts are still all over the place with this game. But thank you for your question. And again, thank you to Barron's SFM for a great explanation on the difference between these two design sets. Our next question comes from Sylvie, he, she. I think it is possible, nay likely, that the dynamic we have always understood of Henry being the animatronic genius and Afton being the businessman is still correct. For evidence, I point to you how massive a technological failure Edwin is. There are only two things he has provably created that were successful. The first being Helper, and even that one is debatable on how useful it is, and the second, his lightning in a bottle, being the Cleanovac. Every other time we hear about his inventions, it's either, this was good at first, but it didn't work out as we had hoped, or it never worked to begin with. I think using the funds that the Cleanovac gave him, Edwin hired on Henry, who went on to create Chica and the springlocks as we see them in-game, even if they are Fiona's designs, just for Afton to poach him as MCM was crashing post-Fiona's death. The only other thing Edwin created was the Mimic, and that was by some major stroke of luck or spiritual influence. So much so that he can't even recreate it, and it had to use the same endobody for M2. In conclusion, I think Edwin is a much bigger fraud, literally a Nepo baby, than Henry and Afton are, and is simply taking credit for the work of others when he had no hand in them. Thank you for your theory. I really like this. Because here's the thing. William Afton. Okay, so here's the leak. Here's what what led me to, you had me think about this. Because we have the one message in the executive office, where it's like, we're almost there, I need the full staff list, and then you can manage one of our locations. And I always thought that was to either Fiona or another higher up, and they didn't give it to him. But clearly he had the staff's contacts. And then we look at how Edwin talks about Henry. He's like, Hen sent me the new designs. I don't understand. They're on nickname basis. And we know Edwin tries to be friends with all of his coworkers and his underlings. The idea that Henry was working for Murray's Costume Manor and betrayed Edwin for William Afton makes a lot of sense here. Because think about it. The idea of, right, Henry is the one building the springlock suits, and like, Fiona tells Edwin, you need to fix these. Henry starts adjusting it for Edwin. But so Henry must have been very high up. He must have been working for a long time. The idea of William Afton approaching Henry and being like, hey, you can manage one of my locations if you give me this staff list and come work for me. We know that Henry was very high up in the company because he was this animatronic genius. The idea of William poaching Henry from Murray's Costume Manor lines up a lot of things. And you are right to point this out. It's something that keeps getting forgotten. The Cleanovac is literally stated in-game as like this thing that Edwin made once that was so successful that every invention he made after that, he's like obsessed with trying to one-up the Cleanovac, and he never can. Like literally when he's making the Mimic, one of the audio logs is like, yes, finally, it's better, it'll be better than the Cleanovac. Like this is his ancient Rome. He is obsessed with being better than the Cleanovac, and every invention he makes fails because of it. Well, not because of that, but it fails in spite of trying to be better than the Cleanovac. So you're right to point out that Edwin only successfully invented like two things, an audio recorder and a vacuum cleaner, right? I do really like, and then that also brings Henry back into it. If Henry was one of the main builders, right? Like Fiona maybe makes the design, and then Henry executes the design, and Edwin is just the middleman, right? Edwin is the manager, the CEO, the guy who's telling people what to do. This makes a lot of sense, and it keeps Henry in this creator role, and even explains where Henry comes from, right? A lot of people, Game Theory, FNAF, my channel, I'm pretty sure ID's Fantasy at some point, a lot of people have made the theory that Henry was from another company and merged into Fazbear. That's been a theory for like 7 years at this point. It is such a well-established theory with decent evidence towards it. A lot of people assumed he came from the company that gave us Chico's Party World or the Mediocre Melodies. But now it seems the company he was a part of was Murray's Costume Manor. And he didn't merge, he was poached and helped destroy Murray's Costume Manor because of it. Which could then explain why a lot of Fazbear people were moving over, or why a lot of Murray's MCM people were moving over to Fazbear. Imagine if you're working for this shitty company, and you've got Edwin the CEO, Fiona the designer, and Henry's one of the main engineers. And it's this company that, like, it's in the gutter, it's not making that much money, it's dangerous, you're working long hours, and then suddenly William Afton approaches like, hey, I've got a company that will treat you right, will pay you better, and look, your lead engineer works for us now. If you like how he designs things, come on over. And like, if Edwin was just the ideas guy and Henry was executing things, I could see a lot of people being like, oh, well, Henry's the guy making us money, let's go work for him. So I like your interpretation a lot, and I think the additional evidence just proves your idea further, Sylvie. So the idea that Henry was working for MCM and was the first to be poached by William, who then gave William the staff contact list, I think makes a lot of sense. Which then it further explains why Edwin feels so betrayed. It's not just a business partner. This is Henry. This is someone who he believes to be a friend, someone who works for his company, likely someone who helped him make the Mimic. That might be where the leak came from. The leak telling William Afton and Fazbear about M2 could have been Henry. So I like this a lot, actually. So thank you for your question, or I guess theory. And our next one comes from Indy, she, her. We don't want ending 3, where the Mimic is fixed, to be canon, but we also should not throw it out entirely. Some reasons why. We know for sure that Fazbear buys MCM. There's a house on a hill which looks like the FNAF 4 house. Here's possibilities. Afton moved into Edwin's house. David's room becomes the crying child's room, seemingly. I have an alternate thought, but it's wild. He discovers M2 there, locks M2 in the basement, possibly the future location of the baby warehouse, the Circus Baby's party and rental house. This could be where M2 was studied or manipulated by Afton. This would explain how M2 learned from Afton and evolved, maybe unlocking memories. This might also explain why M2 appeared as Glitch Trap in a digital space while still being physically locked away with the old suits. Suggestion: the Pizzaplex was built on top of the MCM location, and the house on the hill implying the land was reused repeatedly. In my opinion, it is implied that M1 may be a product of Remnant because he's unable to replicate it and says he doesn't know how it worked. I don't know how Afton learned about Remnant, but I'm tired. There's more to my thoughts, but it's almost 5 a.m. Hey, one more hour and you survived the night. But I thank you for your question, Indy. You bring up a lot of good points. This kind of is a good segue into the reused land in FNAF. The idea that this area where MCM is, where the Edwin Manor is eventually turned into, God, it's so much, right? Is eventually turned into one of the Fazbear locations, and the FNAF 4 house is eventually turned into FNAF 6, and still the FNAF 4 house, and eventually is turned into the Pizzaplex. So, like, it just keeps stacking on top or something. But I think what we're actually seeing here, I think it makes a lot of sense that Afton eventually kind of moves into the Edwin Manor, but it is definitively a different house. So we need to explain it. Either this is a retcon, and this is going to be explained by the indie game developer, but I don't think so, because in Curse of Dreadbear, we very clearly see the FNAF 4 house silhouette. So I think what happens here, and this is where one of the reasons why I think the third ending isn't possible, because the second ending, the one that I think is the most likely, ends with everything being on fire and burning to the ground. This makes way for a lot of things to be rebuilt in its place. Likely the FNAF 4 house. Like, the whole email was like, we're not going to tear down your house. It's the house your parents built. You can keep your house. But if it burned down, well, now it's just land, and we'll place it right where it was. And some rooms maybe survived and were adopted into the new house. Maybe that's why the closet looks the exact same, yada, yada. But the room looks different, right? But even if that's true, then this theory still holds water. Because we have the house there. Underneath it is a massive complex that connects to a fake pizzeria. What does that sound like except for sister location connecting to FNAF 6? And this, now, you're going to hate this. A lot of people are going to hate this. I've been saying for a while that Didophobia might take place in the FNAF 6 tunnels. So what were those words? So Didophobia is the Tales of the Pizzaplex story that has a kid living through FNAF 4 as a hallucinogenic experiment, where it's a series of fake rooms that represent FNAF 4 that are filled with a hallucinogenic gas, so when he goes to sleep, he has these horrific nightmares that are real. They're mannequins being thrown at him, but the gas makes them look much worse. And then when he's walking throughout the day, it kind of looks like his house, but it's kind of weird, and he gets lost a bit, he eats something, he goes back to bed, he has the nightmares again, repeat on this automatic system. I'd been saying that in FNAF 4, the daytime minigames, even if they were real memories, some kid is going through Didophobia in that area. That the FNAF 4 Nightmare Room and that house to Pizzaplex track are all fake, like, tunnels that someone is going through those experiments. And I think Michael Afton is the one who goes through the majority of them. This game gives the most evidence to that theory I've ever seen. Because we see in the sister location bunker that there are rooms that look like the FNAF 4 minigames that are connected to the electricity. And the pizzeria simulator is a fake pizzeria with rooms around it, and I was like, maybe Henry reused those rooms and changed them. But maybe this is what we're seeing. If all of this was eventually turned into FNAF 4 House, Sister Location Bunker, FNAF 6, then Sister Location Bunker and FNAF 6 are physically connected like they are in Didophobia, because these fake tunnels are directly connected to the Sister Location Bunker. So the idea that the research and development fake pizzeria was eventually turned into this, fake pizzeria house area that could be FNAF 4 and its daytime minigames as these hallucinogenic experiments, it's possible because of this. Like, this is the best evidence for that theory I've ever had. So I think it might be likely that FNAF 6 and Didophobia took place in a similar location. And this would then be evidence for the idea that something like Didophobia happened in the books. Not saying Rory is real in the books, but saying that something like Didophobia possibly happened here. So, all this to say, I do think it's incredibly likely that this land was reused by Fazbear, but I don't think that helps to prove ending 3. I think ending 3 is possible, but I think it is the least likely. Because if things didn't burn down, you can't just say that the Murray house is the Afton house. Things needed to change. And I think that everything burning down and being rebuilt is a good explanation for that. And the only ending where everything burns down is the second ending. So that's part of the reason why I think the second ending is so strong. But you're right that we shouldn't throw it out entirely, but I do think ending 3 is still very unlikely. But thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Ibars, him. Henry tells Edwin that they are not going to continue with the springlock suits anymore, though we're never given a clear reason. Edwin replies with, "Why can't we get a teen to wear the suit like we always do?" That line stuck with me, because in a way, it is the solution, right? Here's what I'm wondering. If springlock suits are both animatronic and wearable costumes, why is just putting a teen in the suit considered a viable solution? Doesn't that suggest the issue isn't the suit itself, but the internal endoskeleton, or the autonomous mechanisms inside of it? It makes me think, what if Henry's real concern was that the animatronics were causing problems when functioning on their own? What if his email was more like, Edwin, the suits are acting up when running autonomously, we're shutting them down. And Edwin just responds, then just don't run them on their own. Hire a teen to wear it like always. If that's the case, doesn't that open the door to the idea that something similar to the bite of 83 might have happened even earlier? Like maybe the suits did something dangerous while operating autonomously, even before we see it happen in 83. What really grabs me is how Henry gives a vague excuse and Edwin immediately pushes back with a practical workaround. Would love to hear your thoughts on this in a podcast episode. You get my answer. I think it is possible, because we still have to wonder what went wrong at the Fall Fest that caused the fire that kills Fiona. And I still like my theory I made a couple months ago that an animatronic wearing a felt suit caused a fire that broke out. And this would be an autonomous animatronic. So the idea of a springlock suit causing this fire that maybe wasn't a felt suit kind of starts lining up here. And then that could have given Fazbear the reason to last minute change the designs, right? If they were Fiona's designs, Fiona was alive when this contract started. So I think this kind of sets up this timeline here where Fiona and Edwin take on the Fazbear contract, and it's like, we're going to make springlock suits and we're going to make a new pizzeria. We want you to make the suits and a fake pizzeria. And then partway through, when the springlocks are almost done, Fall Fest happens, and a springlock running autonomously knocks over something, starts the fire, Fall Fest is burned, Fiona dies because of it. After that, then Henry goes to, the Fazbear contract goes to Murray's Costume Manor, is like, hey, we're not doing springlocks anymore. That did not work out well. And then Edwin's response being, just have a teen, don't have it autonomous, have a teen use the suit. This makes this timeline, and I think this works pretty well. I don't really have that much to add to it. I think that would be my answer for it, is that it's not necessarily a bite of 83, but it's that maybe the cause for the Fall Fest fire was a springlock suit failure. And then we think of like, okay, well, why? Like, what other evidence do we have of this? Well, in Fall Fest and Help Wanted, we do have Dreadbear walking around being this like zombie Frankenstein version of Fredbear. So what if it was that the Fredbear springlock suit at Fall Fest caused the fire? Well, Dreadbear is this like agent of death who you could argue looks like Fredbear but burnt, and then he emerges out of the lake, he walks into the barn, and then to follow up again on this, outside of the cabin where Sun or Fiona or M1 or whatever you have it is in moon.exe is a bear guarding the cabin, which is quite strange. And that would explain this. If, if the Fredbear springlock suit in autonomous mode caused the fire, would that then explain why there's a bear on her front porch? Why Dreadbear is so important to Fall Fest? So on and so forth. And if so, would that be the excuse that Fazbear uses to change all of the springlocks to regular animatronics at the last minute in the Fazbear contract? I think there's a lot of evidence in that direction. I would have to contemplate it a bit more, but I think that might be where it's going. So thank you for pointing that out, A-Bars. So thank you for pointing that out. And our next question comes from Rowan, he, him. I've seen a bit of a debate over whether the white tiger we see in the tunnels is a spirit or just a hallucination caused by Arnold being sleep deprived for 36 hours. It occurred to me that it can't be a hallucination for this reason. For Arnold to hallucinate something that looks exactly like David's tiger plush, he would have needed to see it. To my knowledge, Arnold doesn't see the plush until New Game Plus is unlocked, so he wouldn't know what it looks like. Therefore, there has to be a supernatural explanation. Thank you for your question. I've heard 3 explanations for the white tiger. Either a spirit, a hallucination, or I've heard people say the mimic is down there. I've always leaned towards a supernatural explanation. And that's mainly with the way it acts, right? The mimic in the rest of the game, it sees you, it chases you down. And then we get into this basement, and there's this white tiger thing that teleports all over. It seems to be afraid of the light, but will teleport like to you faster if you're in the dark. And then to go further, you look at the animatronic itself, this suit. It is a felt suit, and the mimic can wear those. But if you get close up to it, and this is something that's hard to do in game, but you technically could. It's not like a developer secret or a cheat or anything. If you get close enough to it, and I went out of bounds to get even closer, especially if you look at it from behind, the white tiger suit head is not connected to the body. And this isn't just like they wanted it to look a certain way. No, there is textured for the underside of the head and the top of the torso. The head is floating around, and it allows it to do all those weird like supernatural poses where its head is like rotating and tilting at weird angles because the head isn't connected. That is so ghost-coded, it's crazy. The idea of like a head not fully being there so it can do weird, creepy angles at you. And again, I've heard people say, oh, that's just the animation so they can make it look creepy. They control every part about this game. If they didn't want the head to be disconnected and all creepy in a way that you can see in-game, they could have. Not to mention, again, it acts differently than the mimic. It not only teleports throughout this basement 2 other times in the game. When you're just walking around, it just appears in front of you, giggles, and disappears. The Mimic can't teleport, right? So then I've heard people go, oh, it's a hallucination. And you bring up a great point. If it's a hallucination, where the hell has Arnold seen it before? Because you can't just hallucinate a new thing. It has to be either something you've seen in your life or some kind of combination of things you've seen in your life. And the White Tiger, as far as we know, Arnold didn't even know what Murray's costume manor was until he got here. So I don't know where the hell he would have seen this White Tiger plushie until encountering this spirit. I think it's very clear that the White Tiger is the Golden Freddy of this game. It's this ethereal projection of a spirit haunting this whole location and manifesting in this basement. Frankly, I don't see any other explanation for it. So, yeah, Rowan, I agree. I think this has to be maybe David's spirit manifesting, the general miasma of the location. Who knows? But there is not a non-supernatural explanation for the White Tiger that I buy. So thank you for your question. And our last one comes probably because we're at like 42 minutes on the recording. I know it took a couple breaks to drink some tea and like rest my throat, but we're probably our last question. Comes from Galahad, they, them. At the beginning of the parachute ending, M1, in the voice of Dispatch, implies that M2 stuffs people into suits that matches their personality. And in the first ending, when M2 kills you, they stuff you into the Freddy suit, seemingly the only person who was stuffed down in the fake pizzeria at all. Do you think this says anything about Freddy or Arnold as characters, or was it just to have the Help Wanted reference? Further, if you think it does mean something, do you think it then that Vanessa and Help Wanted being stuffed into the Freddy suit has any significance? As far as Vanessa goes, probably not. But I do think there is significance to Arnold being stuffed in the Freddy suit. And like you said, M1 is like implying that you get stuffed into a suit that kind of represents your personality. Is this true? Who knows? This might be M1 trying to get into our heads. But if it is, the idea of Arnold being stuffed into Freddy does make a lot of sense. Of every other Fazbear technician that's been sent over here, Arnold has made it the farthest, has been the most successful, and has done the most damage to the other animatronics at the location. He defeated Jackie, he defeated Jackie, he defeated Big Top, he defeated Dolly, he defeated Chica. He got all the way through all of this. So him being put into Freddy, I think could be M2 trying to show like, this is the main character, this is the head of the band. Freddy is literally the head of the Fazbear band. And Arnold is the most successful Fazbear technician they've ever sent. To everyone at the facility, Arnold is Freddy. Arnold is the head of the Fazbear band. So I think the idea of Arnold being stuffed into the Freddy suit could be that explanation. Like, you did this, there you go. There is another explanation, though, because Arnold is acting under the direction of M1 the entire time. M1 is leading Arnold along, trying to get him to get the blueprints. He is acting at the behest of M1, almost like he is a puppet, something that M1 is controlling. And in my interpretation of the ending where Arnold gets stuffed into the Freddy suit, M1 is putting on a show for M2 to keep it busy while she waits for Edwin to eventually come back. So in that way, putting Arnold in the Freddy suit and then having M1 make the performance, it's the same thing. Arnold is being puppeted along by M1 to help M2, both in life and now in death. So I think those are probably two explanations for why he's in the Freddy suit, and you know, like you said, it's a really cool parallel to Help Wanted. So there's that too. But I think we'll call it there. So again, thank you everybody for your questions. If you want your questions, it's just the smiling friends. If you want your questions answered on the podcast and you want me to answer your theories and your ideas, you need to email Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description, copy and paste because it's pain to type out. But until next time, as always, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.